welcome back. It is the first Friday of April, and that means we are on to the next chapter of The Nature of Forces. If you are new here, my name is Genevieve Gravel, and I read to you fantasy fiction. So let's go. So we are on chapter 26. If you want to pick up a copy for yourself so you can read along, it is available on Amazon. I will link it in the description, but that's so not necessary because I'll just read it to you. Celeste called for the rain to fall, and the rains came. Her powers contained all life-giving and life-taking. Her powers had been taken from the moon and what allowed for life to flourish in the small part of the world, but she did not care what was to become of the rest of life or all of Mother Nature so long as she had her comforts and luxuries. She didn't give a single thought to what she had done or whom she had become. She felt justified, deserving even, to reap the wealth while all others suffered. Her spell of protection had allowed the greens of the pasture and the trees older than the originals to remain standing, and the leaves of the evergreens under the warmth of the sun that broke through the looming clouds allowed for the women of the coven to create the finest of fashions, just as her sister once did. They wore cosmetics and rich full dresses of silk and the sheerest cottons. This was all Hazel had ever dreamt of. This was now her coven. She had a home, and she cared not of how this castle had come to be. All she cared was that she had found it and found her people, the life and dreams at hand, and she too felt justified and deserving. Hazel, like Celeste, gave no thought to the world beyond this haven. All the girls of the coven had dressed their finest every day, even with no place to go and only chores to do. They often lounged at the dark cherry wood table, polished to a shine, with their half-eaten plates of fruits and cheeses to go to waste, while the wine freely flowed. "I met a boy today," Amber said without prompting, while twirling her long strand of pearls between her fingers while her bare feet rested on the table. "His name's Ramon. He's a butcher. We met in the wood on my daily hike, and he told me to beware of the evil witch of the wood. And for a moment I thought he meant me," she said with a giggle. "He probably did," Phoebe responded, and all the girls laughed, except for Alexis. The girls' jokes never did land with her. She took everything far more seriously than the rest of the coven. Alexis took life far more seriously than the other girls. And while Alexis did not feel deserving of this life full of luxuries, she did not mourn for the rest of humanity nor Mother Nature's current state. In fact, she feared it, but she would never leave the coven. She was tired of the fear buried beneath her tough exterior, and the coven was now her home as well, and come what may, she would protect it with all of herself. And in the city below, the butchers and hunters and any other who ventured out of the perceived safety of Alexandria often encountered the evil witch of the wood, or so they had deemed her. They recalled their encounters generally as a flash of light out of the corner of the eye, or an intense flash of black and white to color, and then she would appear to them, donning a long red cloak and bright green golden eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness that surrounded her. They talked of screams in the wood, soul-shattering shrieks filled with pain and horror, followed by the strange events. Swarms of large insects, roaches or fire ants, trees bursting into flame, and wind strong enough to knock down branches. The few who had claimed to seen her had always recanted the same tale. Ghostly sounds. She had always motioned in one way or another, and at times warning them to keep silent with one finger to her mouth, and a gust strong enough to knock the strongest and biggest and most confident butcher to the wooden floor. All of them scrambled in fear. They ran for their lives. There is no one tale of a person staying to see what happened next. There were tales of people going missing on a hunt. Some say, the evil witch of the wood got them, and there were now ghostly figures and spirits of the night that patrol the wood for her. Others, and most commandingly believe those who had gone missing are missing by choice, and that they preferred to live in the wood rather than enjoy the community of Alexandria. Anyway, either tale would be told to keep the kids out of the woods. Celeste knew of what the town folk had said. Though she wondered who the spirit must be, it most certainly was not Amber. No, this must be an apparition, or a spirit of the dead, or one of great power, to be able to take human form and conjure creatures and control the weather. Celeste was the only one that contained such power, and she possessed life. Who could the spirit be? It was not only inconceivable, but completely unacceptable for any witch other than herself to harness such powers. She had heard of these talks for years, but never had the twins sensed a powerful witch close enough to conjure up a peak. This is the first Celeste had one of her coven utter so much as a single word of the so-called evil witch of the wood. Amber, have you encountered this spirit of the woods? Celeste asked. No, ma'am, not once, Amber responded, popping a stick of celery into her mouth. Well, let me know if you do, and take note of your surroundings. I know how you love to spend your time communing with Mother Nature and painting the flowers pink or whatever it is you do with yourself out there. But I must find her. We must speak, Celeste replied. What do you do all day? Just search for men in the dead woods? Asked Phoebe. Resurgence. I bring life to the deadened wood, Amber said in response. That must be hard, Phoebe overstated, and they all laughed. But Alexis missed the joke and smiled awkwardly. Oh, like a man's prick. I get it, Alexis said few too many awkward seconds later, trying to pretend that she wasn't offended by such crude speech from the women. Amber was not much one for silence and piped in. I once tied the twins' braids together. I thought it was funny. They were cute, full of sweetness, and I laughed and laughed, and they ran around in a tantrum, yelling at each other for their mother. And every time one would move, she would yank the other's hair. Do you remember that, Pen? Amber asked. Penelope didn't respond, not finding any of this funny. Mother had to cut our braids right to the nape of their necks. It took 2 years to grow back, Phoebe responded. It was a different time. You wouldn't understand, Amber told Hazel. I have a twin, Hazel said to the twins. I cut my sister's hair once with a wooden-handled knife. The blade was sharp and boned, and I don't remember where it came from, but I remember how it felt in my hand as I chopped at her hair while she slept, Hazel smiled. She cried like a little baby. My mother didn't talk to me for a week, but they should have thanked me. Honestly, I did her out a favor, and by the time Mama had fixed it, she looked stunning with her hair all cropped, framing her cheekbones, and her eyes popped from behind the dark wispy frame. I mean, it's not like she ever brushed it anyhow. Come on, sister, let's go, Penelope said to Phoebe, tossing her napkin on a half-eaten plate of food. As Kahai and I hiked together, we found the fire was easy to come by, even without magnesium or flint. The woods were so dry that they caught flame with little effort. Water, though, that was not so giving. We drank of our own urine, and always drank the blood of the small game kills. Anything to stay hydrated. I thought of my dreams from the night before, of the twins and their half-eaten plate of food, and my sister laughing at the hurtful way she had treated me in our youth. Ungrateful witch, I thought to myself. Kai could breathe much more easily than I could. I kept my face wrapped with torn linens to filter the thick air. I was often overcome with bouts of coughing, and I hiked slowly from the wheezing, leaving me feeling lightheaded. Kahai only wore protection from time to time when the stench became too much to bear. I suppose it was because he was born into this world and his lungs had adapted to it, where mine had had the protections of home, and it amazed me how quickly life can adapt in only a few generations. The contradictions of how we lived were far more vast than I was ever aware. I learned much from Kahai during our time spent walking together. If I had learned nothing more in the past few months, it was of my own naivete. I thought of my sister often. I had begun to have daydreams of her. I wondered now how her journey seemed so easy in my dreams, why we seemed to suffer through endless days and sleepless nights. But then again, she was running towards something with hope in her heart, and her spirit was filled with wonder and excitement, while I was reluctantly leaving behind everything I had loved. Hazel was always so tenacious, so much more than I. I wonder still why I thought of my dreams as reality. But Kahai was real, and I had dreamt of him. And the sufferings of Mother Nature were real, and I had dreamt of them, though I had bore witness to the death of Mother Nature in my waking hours, just beyond my own tree line of protection. I had wandered into it from time to time back home. I would often visit the torrid beaches and long for a tide, long for a fish, long for the sun, and long for the moon. Everything is so dark and dreary. I miss the greens and yellows of the grass and the turning colors of the leaves in the high tree. I long for the blue skies and the streaks of pink as the sun set. I miss the sun. But with no moon in all her glory, I wonder, will the sun ever shine on Mother Nature again? But this was not my mission. For how could I possibly bring about a cure for something without even knowing the cause? I knew of the volcano and the great storm, but that did not explain where the moon had gone or why she had left us. Kahai told me he had never seen such colors. The truth is that his story filled me with melancholy. For how can one experience joy without color? I could not imagine. Though I guess if you've never had it, how could one miss it? But it hurt me to the core to think that anyone has never experienced color in all its beautiful grandeur. I do believe color is one of Mother Nature's most precious gifts. The months we had spent on this journey had left me with too much time to think. I often found myself lost in deep thought. We were hit with storms of insects. They offered me a little hope, for if they can survive in this environment, so can I. We ate the insects and hunted for mushrooms. Most of the kind we found were filled with toxins that couldn't be consumed by us. Kahai said that some of his people did eat the toxic mushrooms in search of enlightenment or to become one with Mother Nature. It seemed preposterous to me. Search for what you already are? I asked. He said people are really looking for an escape to the realities of this existence. What they truly need to see is the sun. And from time to time, we did come upon a truffle or two, and it felt like we did see the sun. I love truffles. After rooting for mushrooms under the brown and black bush, I sat on a fallen log with my shoes off, listening to Liliana talk. The night air was dense and made me cough. A spider crawled up the log, and it squeezed its swollen black belly into a hole, and I searched for it as she continued with her story of love and betrayal. I'm reaching one finger at a time to find the little spider. Finally, I pulled the spider out with delight and popped it into my mouth. Oh, so good. I hadn't had one since I left home. What are you doing? Those are poisonous, Kahai scolded me as he interrupted Liliana's story. Not in moderation. Back home, we had black spiders on toast every morning for breakfast. My mother called it the fountain of youth, I explained. The black spider has regenerative properties that can ward off illness, regenerate healing, and slow the aging process. To eat spiders on toast for breakfast, I continued to defend myself, is an ancient ritual, the witch Liliana interrupted. The trend died out, and the elixir of eternal life has become a venomous toxin if people have lost their immunity over time. She went on to talk of other witches who were known for eating spiders. She among them. Ancient ritual, I interrupted with a laugh. We just called it breakfast. Liliana went on to talk about the beginning, the lovers and the curse. Fascinated and wide-eyed, I questioned the witch Liliana. What happened of the girl, the sister? The witch Liliana continued to tell of how she found the girl and her sister, and how she believed them to be the children of this union. However, no one knows the truth, or the myth behind the original curse. Evil lives within us all, my darling. We must choose. Evil lives within us all, my darling. One must choose to turn to the light. Now we must stop by my house. I have something for you there. It's a book that will offer you many answers. Heidi, it was written by one of your ancestors. It's a book filled with magic. My ancestors? How did you come by such a book? Why, my mother comes from the woods far from here, I asked of the witch Liliana. I checked it out of the library just before I died. I had hopes of finding a cure for the man I had once loved. A man named Paulo. She answered, Paulo? I know that name. I had dreamt of a wretched creature that fed on human flesh and blood. He did terrible and unspeakable things to all of human life. He is abhorrent to Mother Nature herself. You knew him? You loved him? I questioned with severe judgment. You know less than you think you do. He was not always so. He was young and kind-hearted and filled with love. I knew him as this man. I loved him as this man, and for the man he deserved to be. Not everything is as it seems, and the book will explain. And what it does not, I will do my best to explain of how things came to be what they are, and how to set everything right. We are close for now. Let's just get the book, the witch Liliana concluded. 2 days passed in silent thoughts of despair. We continued to hike with our heads down. We reached the outskirts of what used to be Alexandria to face a river of decay. The experience of it was so much more disturbing than in my dreams. The stench and the dense air overwhelmed me. I held back tears as my feet sank at least 2 inches into the muck leading to the witch Liliana's front door. I struggled to move my feet forward. I held my mask of torn cloth over my face and leaned on my walking stick, without which I doubt I could have stood in this terrain. Once inside her wrecked and dilapidated cabin, I was overtaken with the stench of rot. I tried in vain not to retch. I stepped over the skeletal remains of the witch Liliana, and for the first time since the storm, the spirit was reunited with her body. Hers were not the only remains we found. The skeletal bodies of 2 others were here. Poor fellows, Kahai stated, looking at them. I wonder how he knew that they were men. To me, they just looked like a couple piles of bones. Distraught with the sight, the witch Liliana left without a word of warning. She didn't say anything, but I could feel her energy. It felt like guilt. Perhaps I'm reading her wrong. I hope so. I snatched the book off the table above the pile of bone. Dust swished into the dank air around me, and I took a seat on the dirty sofa with another poof of dust and opened the book. I slowly ran my fingers down the title page, and I stared for the longest time, flashing back to that moment, a memory of my mother talking of the teachings of the Mountain of Life, and I could hear her say, "My father was a great man, Grunswald." This book was written by a man named Grunswald. The witch Liliana had said it was written by my ancestors, but how could it get to a library in Alexandria, a place I had never heard of until recently? With the witch Liliana gone, I couldn't ask her. All I could do was read the dirty and torn pages of this book by the great Grunswald. I had hoped to get lost in its pages with the first word, but this was not the case. It was hard to read, and frankly, it was boring. This plant does this, and that plant does that, then followed by a bunch of recipes and stuff I already knew. All stuff my mother had taught me. It reminded me of her. The way she talked, the way she thought. I too had to write down many of these recipes in my studies. And then the final section began, of a story. It was the story of this man's life and how he came to have the knowledge that he had written down. It read like a personal diary, and I wondered why it had been included in this binding. It told the story of his life, his wife, her life, and her death. It told the story of his children and how they came to be what would be of their lives. It was sweet and written with love and compassion, even through the most evil of events. He wrote of his longing to help his missing daughter and how heartbroken he felt when Genevieve went missing. It told of how he knew where she was, but never did tell or search for her safety, and how he would never stop loving his daughter Celeste, though he knew of the corruption she was capable of. And once I saw it, my mother's name, Genevieve, my eyes filled with tears. She had never told me. I had never known where I had come from. I had never thought of my mother, as a person outside of being my mother. I had never gave a single thought to whom she was before I was born. I assumed she was born in the woods where I grew up, and I had never questioned to whom. She had talked of her father, yet never talked of her mother, and now I know she never had one. Just that I had never known a father. The sadness for her overcame me. She had a loving and kind family in a place that she loved. Alexandria was her home, and she had left it, just as I had left mine. So it's true. I am a descendant to the originals, and my mother is Celeste's sister, and I am Paulo's child. I cried. How I wished the witch Liliana had stayed to answer my many questions. I felt confused and disoriented, and I wanted to go home and back to my life of shelter. Sometimes there's a comfort in ignorance. And my father, he's alive. And I had never known of him or him of me, and for the first time I felt a twinge of hatred for my mother. How could she keep such a secret from me? I read on as Kahai fell asleep next to me. I read by the firelight throughout the night, finding only more questions than answers in the pages of the Book of Magic by the great Grunswald. This thing reads like an encyclopedia, I told Kahai as he opened his eyes. Have you been up all night? He asked me. I tucked the book safely into my pack while Kahai took a long silver blade with the head of a snake carved into the wooden handle off the wall and tucked it in his belt. The heavy thing struck the outside of his knee as he walked. But before we took our leave, I covered the witch Liliana's remains with an old dirty blanket. I wish I could have done more for her. I wanted so badly to show her the respect she deserved. She had deserved it in life. She deserved it in death. By midday, I could see the fires burning in the distance. It was a sure sign of human life, and the sight filled me with hope and a renewed sense of urgency. The deep, rich green goo beneath our feet smelled of death and rot. I tried not to vomit again. I had been throwing up far too many times on this long, arduous journey. I'm sure I'd done so more in this journey than I had in all my years of life combined. Could not wait to get out of there. And my feet sunk further and further into the moist ground below, and my tall boots began to fill with the wretched goo, and the soft fur lining became soggy. The cold of my feet sent shivers up my spine in waves, and I could feel it squishing between my toes. And with that, I vomited. Again. I had never wanted to cry so badly as I did in that moment, but I held back my tears and I wiped my mouth. I began to shiver uncontrollably as the tears, they welled up and began to fall. I was trying so hard to be strong. I began to shiver uncontrollably as the tears began to fall. I was trying so hard to be strong and not let him know how deeply this was affecting me. Kahai said, "We have to pull out and find another way around and head back to higher, more solid ground." He had never mentioned my tears, though his eyes were filled with concern. Then my feet gave way into the decay, and I slipped. My hands splashed down into the goo to my elbow before I could stop the fall, and the green goo it splashed into my face and my eyes, and it slowly ran down and oozed into my mouth. I could feel his hand grab my arm and pull me up to balance. I wiped my face, smearing the slime, and went on without a word. Once we had reached solid ground, I dropped to sitting and began to unlace my calf-high leather boot lined with sloppy, gooey, cold, and wet squirrel fur, and I sunk my feet into the dead leaves and rubbed them for warmth that I'm sure I was never going to find. I felt so dirty. I could feel the muck cracking as it dried on my face, and I could feel the poverty overwhelm me. Looking around, all I could see was death and anger and frustration and denial. And the world began to spin. "Is this what extinction looks like?" I asked. "Not if I can help it," Kahai responded. He took me by the hand and tried to pull me forward. But I was just far too exhausted. Was unable to move forward, so we camped for the night, hoping my shoes and clothing would dry by the firelight in the night frost. I was hoping for a deep and dreamless sleep, but I fear it would not find me that night. So I hope you enjoyed Chapter 26 of The Nature of Forces by me, Genevieve Gravel, and I will be back next First Friday to bring to you Chapter 27. So thanks for watching, and I hope you are inspired to hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much. Remember, you are valid, you are worthy, and you are loved.